So yeah, welcome everyone to this webinar about exploring the potential of high-value datasets, connecting with real use cases. The objective of the webinar is to, on the one hand, raise awareness about the importance of high-value datasets and to share best practices from some of the member states to see how they are progressing on the implementing regulation for high-value datasets. And in addition, on the other side, we also have the goal to interact with stakeholders, the people who are reusing this data made available by governments to see how they create innovative products and services. Before we start, let me just quickly run through some rules of the game. The first is that the webinar will be recorded. We will share the slides afterwards and also make the recording available through our channels, such as YouTube. Maybe some of you have already discovered the chat function, but please, throughout the webinar, pop your messages in the chat. We will collect them, and there are moments where we will have a Q&A with the speakers and try to put as many questions to them as possible. And then lastly, at the end, we would really appreciate your feedback on the webinar. So please stay on at the end and take a moment to submit your feedback. Then I'm happy to introduce the speakers for this webinar. Maybe to start with myself, I'm Martin Page. In the context of data.europa.eu, I lead the Open Data Maturity Assessment, and I'll be the moderator for this webinar. Then the speakers, we have Martina Ramponi. Martina is a consultant at Capgemini Invent with a background in European law, data policy, and data protection. For data.europa.eu, Martina contributes to the research and policy streams. Then Lenka Kovachova is an open data specialist at the Digital and Information Agency in the Czech Republic. She is responsible for the development of the National Open Data Portal, connects open data users and publishers, and participates in working groups focused on digitization and open data tasks. We then have Antti Helen, is a ministerial advisor for European legal affairs at the Ministry of Finance of Finland. He has worked in the public sector for over 13 years with expertise in information management, digitization, and automation, and he has been involved in the implementation of the Open Data Directive since 2020. Then Jyrki Pilar is a legal and policy officer in data policy and the innovation unit at the European Commission's Directorate General for Communications, Network, Content and Technology, DG CNECT. And for the last several years, he has been working on policy initiatives addressing new and emerging issues related to data and advancing the EU open data policy by ensuring its correct implementation of the Open Data and Public Sector Information Directive. Then George Hetmeyer, since 2015, has been the head of legal and public affairs and authorized signatory of Compass, and since 2017, also a member of the regulatory board of the European-based Association of the Search and Information Industry, and he's also now the president of the PSI Alliance, another association of public sector information reusers. And then lastly, the colleague Claudius Dirtemann, since 2013, is the legal and public affairs of Compass Group, and until 2023 has been the managing director of the Austrian Association of UBIT, which is a management consultancy specializing in accounting and information technology. So welcome to all the speakers, representing quite a diverse perspectives on high-value data sets and their reuse. Before we get started, let me run through the agenda. So this webinar is in two parts. The first part is focusing on the supply side of data, if you will. We have contributors from the public sector to describe their best practices around making high-value data sets available in line with the high-value data set regulation. In the second part, we will then go to the reuse side and hear the stories from Compass about high-value data set reuse. So let's start with the first section, where we will look at from the public sector the perspective and data supply. After this segment, so after Martina, Lenka, and Antti, we will then have a moment for a panel discussion. So yeah, throughout the presentation, put your questions in the chat, and yeah, after these three speakers, we will close the first section with a Q&A. So I invite Martina to the floor.
Thank you, Martin. Good morning, everyone. I'm here today to talk about the newly published High-Value Dataset Best Practice Report. So briefly, we can go to the agenda of today. I would like to start with an introduction to the report, then walk you through the methodology and key highlights for the best practices, and finally, walk you through some concluding remarks. So as for the introduction for the report, the high-value dataset implementing regulation entered into force in June 9, 2024, only a few days ago. But what are...
Sorry, I think we are having some problem with audio. So I will instead put Martina and I in the same room. So I will put myself on.
Could you hear me now? Is the audio better now? Perfect. Happy to hear that. So, perfect. Thank you for your answer in the chat. I was exactly introducing what are the high-value datasets. So these are datasets that are particularly valuable for their social and economic benefit. And they are listed in 6 categories provided by the high-value dataset implementing regulation, and more precisely in the annex. What changes for these datasets is that they will have to be free of charge, available through APIs, and possibly be downloadable through bulk downloads, available in machine-readable format, and through open data licenses. I will let my colleague from DG CNECT to explore better what are the changes in the HVD implementing regulation. But for now, the aim of this report was to learn about the challenges that the member states were facing for the implementation of these new requirements, and to identify best practices and actionable recommendations to support the member states in implementing those requirements. As for the methodology of this report that we used, we decided to have qualitative interviews with member state representatives that were involved with the implementation of HVD requirements. And here you will have 2 examples of Lenka and Antti. We interviewed 7 member states, Czechia, Denmark, Estonia, Italy, the Netherlands, Romania, and Finland. And the interviews were based on a questionnaire which follows a previous legal analysis on the HVD implementing regulation, but also the previous legislation that influenced the latest one. And we also used the Open Data Maturity Questionnaire as a starting point. So we proceeded with interviewing firstly the less mature countries based on their answer. Then we tailored the questions for the more mature countries to identify those best practices in these areas where the most struggles lied. Then we could come up with interesting best practices, which are identified in the report and divided into 3 main categories. Policy and legal framework, technical aspects, metadata quality new requirements, and finally, governance and processes. I will give you an example or 2 for each of the area, also trying to highlight the best practices from the countries that are not here as key speaker. So first of all, as for the policy and legal framework, prioritizing and focusing on achievable goals is really important when there are many tasks and limited resources. For example, when implementing the HVDs, it would make sense to prioritize categories that overlap with some existing initiatives like Inspire. So as noted by Czech and Denmark, 3 HVDs categories also fall under the Inspire, and therefore focusing on these areas would allow for a simultaneous progress on both pieces of legislation, optimizing the resources at hand. As for the technical aspect, for some data providers, monetization of the dataset was a big part of their budget, which has important implications when adopting the regulation. For instance, for company and cadastral data, where fees were often required. In order to overcome these challenges, Denmark's experience with the Free Data Initiative is a great example. The Danish Meteorological Institute, in fact, successfully transitioned their business model in 6 phases, which span on a time from 2020 to 2023. Then if we go to the governance and processes to keep national data portals sustainable, it's really important to maintain metadata up to date. For some countries like Czech and Denmark, assign each agency the task of managing their dataset was a great strategy. In this way, the national portal only monitors to ensure that the data is maintained as agreed, and by making individual agency responsible, data providers ensure that the data set are up to date and accurately reflected in the inventory. And finally, the use of platforms to involve citizens in solving real-world challenges was an interesting best practice from Estonia, for example. Estonia's competition encourages people with different skills to contribute to innovative ideas and solutions, regardless of their IT expertise. And these platforms help to bridge the skill gap, allowing countries to access a wider pool of talent and expertise. This report also shows that there are some remaining challenges that need still to be addressed. An example of those is the balance with the data protection standards. So the GDPR, the privacy regulation in Europe, imposes strict rules for processing personal data in the EU, while the HVD regulation encourages the availability and reuse of public sector data. Member states must manage this overlap with GDPR provisions, and this overlap can be challenging, especially in some areas involving sensitive or personal data. You can think about health or demographic data. And the HVD regulation addresses this conflict in recital 8, although some specific challenges needs a more careful thought and careful solutions to balance data accessibility with privacy protection. Another ongoing challenge is the confusion about licenses that can be used alongside with CC licenses for HVDs. Since CC licenses are not mandatory, member states need clarity on whether they can use additional or alternative licenses. This uncertainty makes data sharing practices complicated for both users and data providers, and therefore is it recommended for member states to use CC licenses for as many HVD as possible. And the report ends with a suggested roadmap, which could help the member states in the implementation and compliance with HVD implementing regulation. Some key steps from this roadmap is, for instance, the development of a compliance plan, a comprehensive plan that should include clear timelines, responsibilities, and milestones. Have a comprehensive data inventory is also important to help identifying gaps and prioritize these data sets for accessibility and publication. Another example in this roadmap is to monitor and evaluate the progress to deliver the report every 2 years, as provided and specified in Article 5 of the HVD implementing regulation. And finally, to provide continuous trainings and support, including technical trainings, legal guidance, best practices for data publishing. I believe this is the end of my presentation. So I hope you are as interested as I was in reading this report, and I'll give the floor back to Martin.
Thank you very much, Martina. I see quite a few questions in the chat. Please continue to add questions, and we'll put them to Martina at the Q&A session. And yeah, Martina also might reply to some in the chat. But then, to continue to the next speaker, I give the floor to Lenka.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me all? Yeah, thank you for your answers in the chat. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation. I'm from the Digital and Information Agency. As Martin already said, I work at the coordinating body for the data of public sector in the Czech Republic, and we especially aim at the open data. You may be wondering why the Czech Republic is being led as a best practice when we still don't have anything labeled officially as a HVD in the European Data Portal. I'll also wonder a little bit. However, everything will be ready hopefully soon. What am I going to talk about? Just a little point of view from the part of the Czech Republic. What should have been done at the beginning? What we actually did to accomplish our mission, and what challenges are we facing till today, to be honest. So at the beginning, it was mostly for us to understand what high value means. Why is it necessary to publish these data sets? Why we have all that work ahead of us, and whether it will be appreciated or not. We had to find and understand this motivation so we could explain it even to data providers, not only to the users. Then we had to understand which data sets were actually involved. If you remember the implementing regulations, the regulation as itself was quite short, but the annex was long, and the content of data sets is often defined by completely different legislation, the other EU regulatives or directives. And Digital and Information Agency, as a coordinating body, does not know the substantive content of this legislation, does not know the content of all the information system and registers in the Czech Republic. So this was really necessary for us to understand who are the mandatory authorities in the Czechia, so we can focus on them with our next steps. And last but not least, it was necessary to prepare for increased qualitative requirement and to be ready to explain that HVD is not open data like any other. So what we actually did, what was our activities? For many years, there's something called Open Data Working Group under the Government Council that is led by the Digital and Information Agency, and in which participate the biggest public data or open data providers. There's more than 35 of them right now. We meet regularly. We have our Microsoft team chat, Microsoft Team channel, so we can be in pretty close touch with some of the providers. That is great, and we decided to use this platform even for the information, for spreading the information about HVD. The public bodies were consulted from the very beginning, from the start of the negotiation of the implementing regulations. So then we were just together waiting to see who are going to be the responsible lucky ones. We created a nice sheet. There's nothing that cannot be saved by a good Excel, right? So, and in this sheet we put all the data sets, and we made quite a deep analysis of the real content of the data sets to understand what is going to be published. And at the same time, our lawyers did legal analysis of the Czech legislation so we can identify the data holders. The document was consulted in the Open Data Working Group. They could express their opinion. They could say whether they agreed or not. At that time, everyone was okay with it. That changed. I'm going to talk about it a little bit later. To spread awareness and to deepen the knowledge of the data holders, we talked about HVD at the conferences, workshops, and we decided to organize a special webinar that was aimed especially at the technical requirements for the HVD, and it was at the December 23, if I'm not mistaken, and we even presented there our modified metadata standard, DCAT AP CZ, that is a Czech version of DCAT AP. This one was for HVD according to European Commission guidelines. Since we did not consider the description of data set based only on the categories as sufficient, we created even our, let's say, Czech vocabulary for teams to ensure greater interoperability of the data sets. In the end, even the European Commission also liked it. And in these days, there should be presented even the vocabulary for all the member states in English right now, I think so. And these steps, we were even consulting with another member state, with Slovakia. As some of you may know, the language is quite similar, our history also. So we decided to share our experience with HVD together. The webinar was also recorded, and it is a part, it's published, it's public in the Czech National Data Portal, and it's part of our education section, so anyone can see. And last but not least, challenges. Of course, finances. Some of the data holders find it really, really difficult to prepare due to insufficient financial capacities. It was the classic situation when they were saying, okay, so the European Commission invented something and they didn't give us the money for it, right? They were really worried about the funding to create APIs and persistent identifiers. Unfortunately, Digital and Information Agency had no financial resources for HVD, for the data holders, and only few public bodies actually applied for money from the European funds. Some authorities that were not previously influenced by the open data by default rule here in Czech Republic even had to quickly change the legislation, not because they were not allowed to publish this kind of data set, but in order to receive more money from the state. Another really, really huge problem, and we are still fighting it till today, it's the inconsistency with Inspire. Since a lot of HVD data providers are already data providers for directive, Inspire directive, it's very difficult to explain why it has to be published again, but with different requirements, why there is suddenly another different metadata standard, why it has to be harvested differently from Europe, why Atom, it's not API or the service are they used to. And to be honest, the inconsistency between DG Envy, DG CNECT, and even the member states themselves, it's not making the situation for data providers any easier. And then I was talking about our great Excel that was consulted about 2 months ago. That came a little shock, because despite the fact that we consulted the sheet with the data holders and there's something said by the legislation itself, we suddenly found out that some of the data is in hands of somebody completely different. And usually it's someone who didn't expect it at all, so they didn't really pay attention during our previous activities. So we're some public authorities, we had to start completely from the scratch, and 2 months, it's not enough. And finally, and that's, I think it's a failure of Digital and Information Agency, we were not able to create the central instruments for APIs and to some persistent identifier register to help other data holders. And I worry that it can be a problem in the future from the technical point of view, and I hope we are going to find a solution later, hopefully before the reporting in February 2025. But I don't want to finish this with these negative thoughts, so I wish everyone luck, to the member state, to the data providers, and especially to the users. And if you have any questions, please feel free to ask me in the chat, and I think Martin is going to ask the questions in the Q&A. Thank you very much for your attention, and have a nice day.
Yes, thank you very much, Lenka. Lenka, on behalf of Czechia, was one of the countries interviewed in the HVD Best Practices report. And then another one is the next speaker from Finland. And after the next presentation, we'll have the Q&A with Martina, Lenka, and Antti. So I move slides and then give the floor to Antti.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation, for the opportunity to speak at this event. Like I was introduced earlier, I'm Antti Helin from the Finnish Ministry of Finance, and my role in the implementation of the HVD regulation has been to coordinate the implementation work from the ministry level, because the Ministry of Finance in Finland is responsible for public sector datasets and public sector digitalization matters, and also to investigate and evaluate possible legal questions that might arise from the implementation of the HVD regulation, like, for instance, the potential for the potential need for changes to national legislation. But yeah, let's press on with the presentation. Just to set the stage for our implementation of both the Open Data Directive and then also the implementation of the HVD regulation. Finland has had different kinds of open data programs and different other government level programs related to the opening of and utilization of public sector data for the better part of a decade by now. We also have both a constitutional principle that applies to the openness of government documents, in this context also the openness of government data, which has been implemented through the so-called Act on Openness of Government Activities, or the Transparency Law. This laid a foundation for the implementation of the Open Data Directive, also earlier the PSI Directive, in the sense that it was already an established principle that all government documents, if there is no legal basis for them to be confidential, that they should be available as easily as possible and without free of charge, also if they can be delivered without any excess work, and if they can be delivered in an electronic format, mostly of course email rather than a bulk download or an API, but regardless. Also, another development in the last few years has been the new Act on Information Management in Public Administration, which I will talk about next. But this is kind of like to lay out the basis that we already had. Our work in the implementation of both the directive and the regulation was made fairly straightforward on the basis that we already had a fairly long history of both legal and practical work in the opening of government data. So in that sense, I myself arrived at the Ministry of Finance in 2020, relatively recently. So my work has been fairly easy thanks to the work done by my predecessors in similar positions. As regards to the Act on Information Management, the idea of the Act on Information Management is that it encompasses as much of the public administration as possible, including regional and local authorities. And the idea is that it will it ensures the high quality management and processing of government datasets. This applies to all kinds of datasets, also confidential datasets. But the idea is that that government datasets should be findable and as interoperable as possible within the resources that the public sector has available to it, of course. This act was also beneficial for us in the sense of the implementation of the HVD regulation, because it mandated creation of the so-called information management map of public administration. So this is basically a description and an inventory of the different information pools or data sets that we have in the Finnish public administration, and also the legal basis for collecting these data sets and the legal basis for getting information from these data sets, because this kind of these data flows are very closely regulated in Finnish legal practice, which means that we also need to have all the information at hand, like what are the legal basis for both collecting the data and also the legal basis for different government entities to be able to request or deliver the data to other government entities or to like private sector entities. So when it came to the implementation of the HVD regulation, we were able to take advantage of this information management map. It wasn't quite finished yet by the time the HVD regulation arrived, but it gave us a pretty good groundwork for figuring out, well, these are the important datasets, or the high-value datasets, if you will, and we know that this kind of dataset is maintained by this kind of public sector authority or this specific public sector authority. So that gave us a head start when it came to the moment of truth of figuring out which are the actual datasets that the regulation applies, and also the people or the organizations responsible for those datasets, and whether those datasets were applicable to this, whether they were open and public and not confidential in the first place. Of course, we were also able to take advantage of some of the work that we did for the 2021 implementation of the Open Data Directive, because of course we had the directive before we had the implementing regulation. And also the Act on Information Management that I just mentioned, we have also on the basis of that created different kinds of working groups and forums within public administration. So this was also a way for us to collect information and spread understanding of how the Open Data Directive and the implementing regulations work. Then when it came to time to actually start implementation work of the HVD regulation in late 2022, once we had used the information management map and the coordination groups and stakeholder groups and so on, we were able to identify what I'd call critical stakeholders. So this would be most importantly, these would be the data holders that had the data sets that the HVD regulation would apply to. We established 3 different groups for coordination work and for implementation work. First group was the working group for legal issues. This was also the group that I was in charge of. I was the chairperson of this group. This was formed out of representatives from different government ministries, because ministries are responsible for implementing and updating sector-specific legislation. We set up a cross-sectoral coordination group to solve practical and technical issues. This involved both representatives from ministries and from actual public sector bodies, like the Environmental Authority or the Statistics Authority, and so on. We also set up a more informal network for interested parties and stakeholders, so we could collect feedback from stakeholders, and also so we could discuss things together with them. This was like a very open doors policy kind of forum, so the threshold for participation was supposed to be very low, and we advertised these network meetings very openly, and basically anyone who was interested was able to join. All these meetings were held through the magic of Teams, so there was no hindrance from having to travel to Helsinki for meetings or so on. So everything happened remotely in this sense. We also involved the Geospatial Data Advisory Board, who are responsible or who are involved in the implementation of the INSPIRE directive and the opening of geospatial data. And we also took advantage of their secretary, because they have very good and deep understanding of the technical issues and questions that are related to HVD stuff. Okay, so kind of reflective of what the Czech Republic did, or what they did in the Czech Republic. In the end, the best solution we came up with for tracking down and keeping an eye on the different high-value data sets was an Excel spreadsheet. So this is basically it's not really, it doesn't have to be a spreadsheet, of course. It's basically a table. It's a table for different kinds of data, except in this case the data is the data sets themselves, and this allowed us to keep an eye on what the different data sets are, what's the reference to that in the HVD regulation, and also to make sure that those data sets will meet the requirements from the regulation, or that if they are not meeting the requirements, then we can keep on track on the progress towards meeting those requirements. So if a data set, for example, wasn't available through an API yet, then this table would tell us, we would mark down in the table that it isn't, and then we would use the table to track progress of until that data set would be available through an API. I think in terms of numbers, we ended up tracking down and putting in the table, I think it was a little over 100 different data sets. And this number can vary because different kinds of data sets in different member states, I believe, can be organized in different ways. So in some member states, a data set might be one data set, and in other member states, it might be like 4 or 5 different data sets, depending on how you organize the activities related to the data set, or the activity itself that creates the data set. So on some reflections on this work. Our finding was that once we were able to track down and put in the table most of the HVD datasets, most of them were already fully or nearly fully compliant with the HVD regulation. We did not identify, fortunately, any major legal issues or questions. There have been some questions related to the application of the Open Data Directive stipulation on data protection and the GDPR itself. But those have been left up to the interpretation of the data controller or the data processor in this sense. So the dataset holder is the one who is responsible for applying both the HVD regulation and the GDPR in this context. Like I understood with the Czech examples, one of the biggest challenge was understanding the relationship between the requirements from the INSPIRE directive and the requirements from the HVD regulation. One observation that I made, though I'm not a very technical person, is that the Inspire community as a large, they were constantly asking for very specific technical requirements that I was not able to find from the HVD regulation. We did also correspond with the Commission on some of these questions, but and the Commission was very helpful in that sense. But of course, the Commission can't afterwards make the regulation more specific or detailed than what it is originally. Putting that aside. So in that sense, like the Inspire data sets are usually held to a much more strict and technical standard or specification, I should say in this case, than what is listed in the HVD regulations annex. One big challenge that remains is that land use plan datasets, which are held by our over 300 municipalities, most of those aren't in HVD compliant shape yet because of the sheer volume of them and because of the work involved and because smaller municipalities don't have the necessary resources always. And finally, like reflecting on my own role in this process, I have some experience in software development on the public sector side, but definitely not having quite the same level of technical know-how and expertise as the people on the practical side meant that I was relying a lot on the expertise of other people and was also faced sometimes with questions that I simply couldn't answer because I didn't have the technical expertise to understand the question maybe in the first place. But still, like to go on a high note, I think our progress has been very good, and we'll be pretty prepared for the reporting when it comes around early next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Antti. So that was the last presentation for this first segment. We'll now go into a Q&A. So I asked the speakers to come back online. Martina, Lenka, Antti, thank you again. If you have any questions, put it in the chat. We've been collecting them. And yeah, let me start. There was a question for Martina about the best practices report. How did you go about setting the methodology for the report and deciding who to interview?
Yeah, so thank you for your question. First of all, perhaps a sound check. Can you hear me now? Perfect. Yeah. All right, thank you. So we decided to set up a questionnaire starting from the Open Data Maturity Assessment questionnaire from 2023. And based on the results that are available from those questionnaires, we selected 7 member states, which could give us a balanced representation of a big picture of the progress that the member states were facing when implementing the HVD requirements. So we contacted 7 member states and we proceeded with a 1-hour interview face-to-face, and 2 of them were, of course, Lenka and Antti. The questionnaire was divided into 3 areas, so legal and policy framework, processes and governance, and technical requirements and new requirements. We asked some questions starting from the first member states, and we proceeded with tailoring the questions for the later member states in order to really find out some best practices in those areas that we identified the more challenges and issues were coming from.
And who did you speak to? What kind of roles were the people? More on the ministry side or more working with the data portal?
We had a variety of people we spoke to, but mainly from the ministerial side. Although, of course, they also brought up the issues, challenges, and best practices they knew from data portals. And even, I believe, Antti also brought up the challenges that different municipalities were facing.
And yeah, having interviewed 6 countries, what surprised you the most? What struck you?
I believe what surprised me the most was that in some member states, the open data were already there for the public sector. So, for some member states, the fact that public sector data were already available and free of charge was a cultural tradition that was going on since a lot of years. So there were not many changes in terms of the foundation of the regulation already made. The main changes were about technical requirements and some overlaps with previous pieces of legislation.
That actually reminds me a bit of your presentation, Antti. Does that resonate with you? You kind of explain the history of the legislation, and then when you looked at the HVDs, they were already quite compliant.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't catch the whole dialogue because I was answering the chat questions. There was a lot of questions in chat, but yeah, we found that because of the especially with the implementation work of the INSPIRE directive beforehand, and also because of the principle and activities related to the opening of data, we didn't really run into a situation where a data set would be publicly available, but it wasn't publicly available as a bulk download or as an API. And with like technical standards or file formats, we didn't really have any issues with those because open formats and broadly available standards have been in use for a very long time already.
There's also a question about how big is the team working on HVDs?
Yeah, I answered that in chat. We had like 3-4 people at the ministry level, though all of us part-time, and then we also, our national data portal team has about 3 part-time people.
And I'm also curious, it's a complex environment. There's a policy side, the legal side, all these technical sides. You mentioned in your presentation that having the technical know-how is challenging. And I guess that's where you need a team with different skills. And how do you navigate that? And what is your advice to other people in the same position? They're coordinating things, but it's complex and there are technicalities.
I can start. What I would say is sufficient humility, like be humble, be straightforward. Like, I'm sorry, but I don't understand this question. Can we maybe go over it in more detail? Like I said, I have some experience in developing software and actually like building APIs, but in a very different context. So I wasn't like completely new to this, but stuff like file formats and so on, that was like completely new to me. And also like another challenge is that, well, I've been the person responsible for the HVD implementation for the last 4 years. I may not be the person responsible in like 10 years or whatever. So there's also how do we transfer those skills forward to successors or other people, or maybe next time we update the HVD regulation, I'm unavailable because I'm sick or something like that. So that's also like a challenge because resources are always scarce.
I want to put a similar question to Lenka. Navigating this complex environment with different subject matter expertise needed. How do you go about it? What have you learned?
It was quite tricky actually, because we don't have these capacities even in the Digital and Information Agency. We don't have the background, as Antti mentioned like 1 minute ago. So it was up to the data holders and then the companies that were preparing the open data portal, open data sets even before. So this was completely on the data holders. We were capable to prepare metadata standard, and it's obligatory for them to follow it. I think they're quite used to it for several years, so it was quite easy to implement the metadata standards. But from the point of view like API and the persistent ERE, I was already mentioning, it's quite a mess. And for many data providers, it's still very difficult to find it. That's actually the reasons we still don't have the officially labeled HVD in the data portal, because from the content point of view, like the majority of the data sets is already published, or from before, or it was published in the last 2 years. But from the quality requirements, we still have to do a lot of work that is ahead of us.
There was also a question in the chat about the estimated number of data sets. So you went through this process to identify all these data sets.
Yeah, we were able to do it. There was only a few of them that we were not collecting because we don't have C, for example, and etc. I think it's more than 200, but as already Antti said, it's like the number is not going to say you anything, because you can like have 3 teams in 1 data set or 1 team in 10 data sets, and you still in accordance with the EU legislation. So like the actual number is not saying you anything, but we have like more than, I think, 15, more than 10 data providers. They're responsible for the publications, but inside these providers, there's a lot of like sub-bureau or sub-public bodies. They're responsible, and they are not really used to publish open data. So they has to be really like a big cooperation with the central offices.
And Lenka, there was a question also directed to you about overcoming. How have you overcome or still overcoming institutional resistance, or maybe it's lack of understanding from other agencies regarding the need to implement such practices?
Yeah, I think it was like there's going to be every time somebody who's not going to cooperate with you. That's how it is, because of the capacities, because of the institutional bad relationship, something. There's always going to be somebody. But with most of the public offices, I think it's like this overcoming of the possible problems. It's the result of the really long relationship we will be building from the beginning of all the open data process. So with some of the institutions, we are in real like close touch. They were helping even to us, not that the central body was helping to them. So I think it's really up to some personal relationships, and that I think maybe I can say that we really take care of the open data community, especially from the point of view of the mandatory authorities, and we work on it. We have this regular meeting, and then it's going to really facilitate to the central coordinating body to have the process done.
Yeah, thank you. So we are on time to move to the next section of the webinar. So I will kind of close the Q&A. However, in the chat, the kind of open questions, there were questions around statistical APIs and data sets, and also for Finland about if it's possible for others to participate into that third stakeholder group you mentioned of interested stakeholders. I would appreciate if you could, if the Lenka and Antti, if you could look at the chat, if there are any open questions. Yeah, then thank you again to the speakers for this first section. Then we move on to the second section of this webinar, which is focused, if you see this first one, the countries, the data providers supply the data, and then that data is made available for reuse. We now also want to hear the side of the reusers. And yeah, we start with Jyrka from DG CNECT to introduce this segment. So Jyrka, welcome. I give you the floor.
Good morning. Just a quick confirmation that you can hear me.
Yes, can hear you.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for coming in such huge numbers. As you rightly recognized, I don't represent the reusers yet. They will speak after me. I represent the European Commission, concretely the team that works on data policy for Europe, and one of those data policies promoting sharing of data is the policy concerning open data. And it exists since more than 20 years under the name of public sector information reuse. And principally it says that if you have public sector data that is accessible, it should not be kept secret. It means also that anyone can take it and reuse it for some other means. We definitely build on access rules that are in place in member states, so we do not want any member state to disclose more than they think is reasonable. This includes also protection of copyright and personal data protection. Of course, the fact that it exists since 20 years doesn't mean that the EU invented public sector information reuse. You will hear from the next speakers that this has been around for some time. We just wanted to put some rules for that. And this policy developed. It was not a revolution, it was just an evolution towards high-value data sets that we have on the table today. We chose 6 categories of public sector data where there is a potential that there will be a lot of reusers, and when they make the data available as a part of some services and products, there will be a lot of added value and a lot of citizens and companies who will benefit from that. So really no revolution. Most of data has already been opened before. So the member states already knew about the data. The data exists. Where the data doesn't exist, of course, it's not in the scope. And the only objective here that really changes the game is that the reuser is the king here. The reuser has a clear position from which it can come and say, look, this is the data that should be available. It should be for free, and it should be very easily obtainable and reusable. But again, we do not tell these individual sectors how they should organize their data. We just tell them, make it easily reusable. We do not tell them, make this data set smaller, bigger, more granular, broken into 10 pieces, or rather into one. This still remains within the realm of the sectoral experts and those who have power over the given sector. Just as a reaction to one of the questions, these 6 categories can be extended. It is not planned in the very near future, but as you know, we will have a new commission from the end of this year. So we can expect that under the new commission mandate, there will be some extension of the list of these categories. And since we have the list in place for some time, the Commission and other colleagues who know about technical issues have been working in the background, preparing metadata schema, code lists. The colleagues from the Open Data Portal were getting ready to harvest and present the metadata from high-value data sets, all under the name to make it easier to find the high-value data sets, and eventually also make it easier for member states to report to the Commission. Because like for most of legislation, member states have to report to the Commission what they have done to get in line with the legislation. This is the case here. We will expect that in February next year, we will get from member states reports on how they are doing. They will need to let us know where the high-value data sets are, how they are made available, how are the licensing conditions, APIs, etc. So for that purpose, there is this metadata schema, code lists, and naturally the Open Data Portal that harvests the data. And we do not do it just to have some internal fun here with member states. We think that all this will also benefit to reusers, citizens, anyone who wants to find high-value data sets, because thanks to the fact that there is harmonized metadata, and that the metadata is then findable on the European Open Data Portal, you can run the queries. And for those who are more efficient with Sparkle queries, of course, for those of us who rely rather on filters, there are filters that allow you to find the high-value data sets in respective categories. So thanks to all this, the high-value data set should be more easily findable. I will just add a word of warning, because since we are still very early days of the application of the regulation on high-value data sets, not all member states have filled in all the metadata in all the right formats. And even if they did, the European Data Portal probably not yet harvested all that new metadata. So this will be only coming gradually to you. So this was by way of introduction, and now please let me hand over to our colleagues from Austria.
Yes, thank you, Jörg, for the introduction. And now I call the colleagues from Campus.
Yeah, hello. This is Georg Hittmeyer. Good morning. I'd like to tell you a little bit about Compass and what we do with public sector information and what we plan to do with high-value data sets. Compass is an old address book publisher, and we follow the same business model since about 150 years. Which means we collect data from various sources, and the most important elements are data from the Austrian company register. We scraped this data also 150 years ago. So it was public sector information we used, and so it's nothing really new what happens. As said before, that's the backbone of our publications. We combine this data of the company register with other interesting information. In 1868, it was custom tariffs and the costs for telegrams. This was essential at that time. At the moment, we changed to sanctions lists, politically exposed persons, trademarks and patents, identifiers like VAT numbers, national bank numbers, and so on. A lot of other stuff would be interesting that should be reusable according to the European legislation. That could be tenders won in contract award procedures, or carbon dioxide emissions and water rights, emission characteristics, and beginning of next year also CSRD publications. And all this data you could combine with company data, and that would be would meet the demands of our customers, but it's always a question of complexity and resources. We transfer those data to modern storage media. This was modern storage media in 1868. If you look behind me, these are 100 years of publication, and well, we sell these data to our customers, which are mainly the Austrian banks. Some of our customers buy our data, our information, since more than 150 years. When we had this anniversary, this CEO of an Austrian bank congratulated us to 150-year delivery of data to their bank. The business model is long-standing. Storage media vary. We started with books. We published books till 2003. But we started with electronic versions in the 1980s, published CD-ROMs, transmitted with MUPIT and fax solutions. And at the moment, we store our data in 2 parallel data centers on both sides of the Danube. Our big advantage is that we deliver the information according to the needs of our customers just in time. So exactly when they need it. And we simplify and we shorten their fraud prevention and know your customer processes, and therefore save them money. That's why they buy our data. Our services also include financial statements and bylaws. We license and store all available balance sheets of Austrian companies. We store, I think, about 2 million. We digitize them in our own format. And when necessary, we can display time series of companies. And we also collect all the other documents from the company registers, and our customers have access to these documents.
Yeah, and thank you, Georg. I want to explain a little bit now, also coming to the high-value data sets, why they are of such big value to us. Because we have a little graphic showing on the left side that we take data from more than 40 data origins, mostly public sector information, and we use it to make our product one single platform that really combines all the information, trademarks, patents, and all of this. And of course, all this information is only of a really high value when it's up to date. You receive it on a daily basis, and this is exactly what high-value data sets do. So if you want to have a competitive and good product, you really need to have access and implement all those high-value data sets. And just to give you a little bit of an understanding why it needs this combination, if you have all those 40 registers and you would want to, I don't know, get a picture of an organization, you would always have single sign-ons, single account information. You don't even know if one company or person from this register, maybe with a similar name or the same name, is the same in another. And so we really use by now artificial intelligence, self-learning algorithms to identify individuals here and really raise the quality. And this is exactly what our customers need for money laundering, know your customer. There's so many regulatory use cases for this information. And so the history of high-value data sets, when they were first announced, our high hopes were that they would compromise all the disclosed company data. But eventually the political compromise was to us a very big disappointment, and was really reduced down to only 8 key attributes. And I think this is also important to understand from a bigger perspective. Why do we need this? Like, what's the big deal about high-value data sets? This is necessary for new technology like artificial intelligence. You need to train your models on big amounts of data, and without those you can't develop them. And Europe is already lagging behind in hardware, technology, software. The US and Asia, they are not waiting for us. So if we want to catch up, we need to speed things up and really make big amounts of data available fast. So as I explained, for a working business model, you need especially consistency through all the member states, APIs, to really have up-to-date access on a daily basis, update cycle on a daily basis, and also consistency with the data categories. So you have a consistent product you can really use to address all these information requirements. And the problem at the moment is, especially regarding the APIs that implement all this data in your database, and that you need huge investments in manpower for maintenance, because at the moment you have 27 different registers. I'm talking about company register information. That's our main business model, but of course it also applies to other high-value data sets. And merging all those different sources takes so much manpower, especially when you're dealing with many different formats. It's, if you have to maybe picture it like this, already combining one new data source needs to be implemented in the algorithm with the other data you have, the products, the visualization, and all of this. And every layer, if it's a new format, leads to an exponential effort. And on top of that, you need money to hire IT specialists, and you don't even find them easily. There's a shortage of IT specialists all over Europe. So this really, if we don't have easy and harmonized formats, this will take years and years to implement. So, but an European solution exists, basically. The BRIS, the Business Register Interconnection System. But this is a platform by the European Commission, and member states are obliged to provide their data to the BRIS. But we applied for the data, and at the moment we had the answer that it's not accessible for reuse, and therefore we can only sit and watch. BRIS would be so great to use because of the high degree of topicality. It's up to date, it's harmonized. They use a harmonized data format. This is exactly what I mentioned earlier, the API. They have one format all over Europe for all member states and would be ready to use. But unfortunately, we don't get access. Here to you.
Well, when it comes to reuse of the other documents, then it's company and company ownership data. According to a document Q&As for the member states, the obligation to provide high-value data sets was weakened from our perspective. So the implementing regulation does not oblige member states to create data sets or to provide data sets which are not accessible. So if, for example, the NACE code in a country is not accessible but exists, it will not be provided, although it's a category in the annex to the Implementing Act. And the next problem, which was also mentioned earlier, is the topic of personal data. So member states should make appropriate use of anonymization to provide documents. But if you think of a document regarding a board of directors, which you anonymize, at the end it's quite useless. And that's what happens. So this leads also to a further problem, the sole trader problem. Sole traders are often listed in the company register with their names and private addresses. If these data are not disclosed and not provided, the register data are incomplete and therefore unusable, unreliable. And that's really a problem if you offer member states to go this way and don't do a privacy impact assessment for the whole of Europe with one outcome, which should be possible as the GDPR's European law. The reuse of business registers, which is necessary now for us if we want to do a European business case, apart from high-value data sets is rather difficult because there are many obstacles. You don't get requests you don't get responses to your requests. Free access is only possible for record-by-record searches. Bulk access must be paid for. The privacy is a problem in many occasions, although it's possible to get those data if you pay a lot for, which up to my information is also in the Dutch case or Italy, a possibility to gain those data. That's a report from Access Info Europe, where they describe these problems very clearly.
Thank you, Martin. I've seen you, the light bulb. We have. We'll take 1 minute maybe to wrap things up. Yushi, you also mentioned the platform data.europa EU. In order to know and not spend weeks and months to assess always the availability of data, the data sets are now declared. At least that there is the possibility to search from them. But at the moment, we checked yesterday. Today it's 2 data sets, but yesterday it was 1 data set. Even though all member states are obliged to publish them, are at the moment available on the platform. I hope many more will follow soon. At the moment, it's really not a very optimistic number. And just to wrap things up, those are the barriers. We need a central platform that provide the high-value data sets. We need harmonized solutions, APIs. The legal and administrative barriers must be lowered. And eventually, the solution for all of this to break down those barriers is exactly this. Data on a daily basis, EU-wide. You should provide the API and eventually also tear down the legal exceptions. Don't use data protection for public data. Those are public registers. This is just a reason not to, or to avoid the administrative and financial burdens, but maybe, we all benefit from opening it up. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Claudius and George. I also call Jürgen back, and we can go into a question and answer sessions. People in the audience, if you have more questions, put them in the chat. Maybe I can start with a reflection. In one of the reports that data.europa published recently, we described the open data value chain, where it starts with data being collected and then made available and ultimately reused, and the data goes through all this processing and steps along the way, and progressively becomes more valuable. So if I understand what you are also saying, is that if the processing and harmonization happens earlier on, more value is unlocked than if you have to process it and collect it later. Is that also a fair characterization of what you were describing?
If data are already processed earlier, so for us, the company registers are the backbone of any solution. If data are processed already on a daily basis and matched and combined and are available, and then you force the public sector to do all this again, because the European Union doesn't want to provide these data, but talks at the other hand of high-value data sets, that's not understandable for us. And so it's if it exists, please release it.
Then if you were to summarize your main request to data providers in the member states? What would that be? So this is on the national level of the countries.
Yeah, I think maybe really use the format of the BRIS, and really publish it in this existing harmonized data format. This would help anybody who wants to reuse this data EU-wide. Is it startups? Is it already existing companies? If you want to start up a new company, you have one data set at the moment on high-value data sets, and it would take so much efforts for IT specialists, years of work. You can't make up a startup at the moment.
So that's kind of a message to the member states. And if you were to have a main request at the EU level, Commission data.europa.eu, what would that be?
There are lots and lots of European legal acts that require the member states to disclose data. If you want to find high-value data set, go through this legal obligations and declare those data to be high-value data sets and published and reusable. And then things speed up. So that when there are those workshops, which should be the next high-value data sets, we discuss, and we did it. We spent some time in those workshops, but it didn't change anything. Speed up. Legal data, procurement data, health data. The categories lie on the table and speed up.
I think in terms of speeding up, there's been a lot of questions about harmonization and standardization. I want to put a question to Jurka that was in the chat, kind of asking, what does harmonized metadata actually mean when it comes to national portals?
Well, when we speak about harmonized metadata, given that the regulation on high-value datasets is a horizontal measure, we do not say that the metadata has to look exactly the same for methodological data as it should for statistical data, as it should for company data. So whenever there's some existing standard in the given sector, it's perfectly fine when the sector follows that standard that has been developed for its needs, and that we can assume that works well for the sector. Now, for the purpose of making data available, findable, harvestable, and identifiable as high-value data sets, our colleagues from CNECT, from the interoperability body of the EU, have developed a specific metadata schema for high-value data sets. It's called data.apa for high-value data sets, and there it allows you to mark simply the fact that the data set is a high-value data set, that it belongs to a certain category, mark it where the API is, what are the licensing conditions. So this is something that we made available to member states, so that when they make available data as high-value data sets, everyone can find it and find the important information about it. In this context, there was also a question, where exactly are the endpoints, or where are member states publishing these data sets? Here again, there is no uniform rule for that, but we just want member states to tell us where those endpoints are, or tell the European Data Portal, so that the portal knows where to go and look for it, where to harvest the data from, so that you can find it in one place. In some sectors, again, this effort has been done on the European level for Inspire geospatial data, for example. Our colleagues are since decades building a central European repository for geospatial data. Statistical colleagues, probably they work on it even longer than that. So all this takes time. High-value data sets are slowly coming on the European data portal as well. We'll see how this shapes up. But I would not expect that from the early days, months, you will see a lot of harmonization in what the data sets look like, for example, how they are structured. Because this is very much a legacy thing of how the individual sectors are working. And in principle, they should be following their sectoral rules on how the data sets are built and what they should contain and how granular they should be. Because what the High-Value Datasets regulation does, it adds the reuse layer.
There was also a question about efforts or plans to harmonize high-value datasets across member states. So yeah, maybe could you explain any plans or support that is available to member states in this effort to harmonize high-value datasets?
Well, again, that's what I was talking about. It's a sectoral job. Some sectors are more advanced than others, and there has been some funding available under the program called Digital Europe, and there have been some projects mainly in categories of geospatial data, and currently there is one running for methodology. Currently there is no new Digital Europe program open for High-Value datasets, so I cannot offer any new calls for this. But there's been some help for that. Overall, we can say the geospatial data and statistical data are quite far in this respect. Then you have the company information. There is some involvement of the European Commission, but we just heard from our Compass colleagues that it's still not where it should be in terms of harmonization data and its availability on the central level.
Then I would like to go to the question of why. Earlier in the chat, someone just asked, why HVDs? What are they serving? What is the benefit? But I think is a good point to emphasize. So from your perspective, what is the main value that HVDs are bringing?
Maybe I can try to answer this on the example of Germany. There's the German business register, and they are, of course, like all national registered by EU law, obliged to publish the information. But in their terms of use, they only allow single requests. So, and then if you really want to make a working product, an information product where companies can search, it would take years or hundreds of years to really get a comprehensive database on the German register. And that's just one country. And big change is now with high-value datasets, you would have the right to a bulk download of the complete datasets. Only 8 categories, but at least.
To continue the conversation, Claudius, there was a you mentioned also Europe and the talent gap, where it's difficult to sometimes get the right expertise. There was a question about how would you, from your perspective, how would you catalyze these productive ecosystems, bridging talent and the projects?
I'm not sure if I understood the question correctly. How do we deal with this search for IT specialists and exactly, yeah. So, well, a lot of it is in-house training because it's on the market. As I said, there are a few IT specialists you can hire just and immediately use them. And we build up a lot of knowledge in our company ourselves, really just try to improve the data quality, use learning models, AI systems to combine quicker, faster, raise the quality and also legal certainty, all of this. Because I don't know, for example, when you have money laundering or terrorism or sanctions against Russia, you need to be really 100% sure if this is the right person, company, or anything. And from the data, it's almost impossible to be 100% sure, but with good software, good self-learning algorithms, you can be a 99.9% sure.
Maybe we have time for one more quick question. There was a lot of mention in the chat about APIs and the kind of specifications that are fit for purpose for AI agents. So maybe briefly, colleagues from the Compass group, from a reuser perspective, what would your message be on the most important aspects about APIs and their specifications?
I think now you reach the wrong persons. We are the lawyers, and we can't give you. If we try to give you an answer now, half of the participants in the call would laugh, and the other half would think they are stupid. So I think it's easier we don't answer.
Then we leave it there, and I think we are nicely at time. So thank you all, and to all the speakers in today's presentation, and thank you for everyone in the chat for all the questions. As you know, this is a webinar by data.europa.eu, and we have some also upcoming webinars. The two upcoming ones next week. There's one from the European Monitoring Center for Drug and Drug Addiction, who will present about how they've implemented a data sharing strategy for their reporting, as well as give insights on the interactive and visualizations that they have created using open data. If you like open data reuse, there's a webinar on the Use Case Observatory, another report by data.europa.eu that looks at initiatives in the economic, governmental, social, and environmental spheres, where we'll have speakers presenting on their use cases, so first-hand insights into the practical benefit and challenges of open data reuse. Then finally, please take a moment to give us feedback. You can scan the QR code. There's also a button at the top of the screen. And then just thank you again for your participation. Thank you to the speakers, and we will follow up by sharing the slides and summarizing the output of the chat.